The observation deck of the Wandering Star was quiet at this hour, save for the gentle hum of life support systems and the distant thrum of the ship's gravitational stabilizers. Dr. Ellen Mara sat cross-legged on the floor, her back against the viewport that displayed an endless canvas of stars, and stared at the puddle of tea spreading across the metal plating. It wasn't the expensive kind of tea, just standard-issue Earl Grey from the dispensary. But it had been hot, and it had been hers, and now it was seeping into the grooves of the deck plating like her motivation was seeping out of her soul. "Damn it," she muttered, watching the brown liquid creep toward her toolkit. She'd been working a double shift repairing the atmospheric recyclers in Section 7, and this tea had been her reward. One moment of peace before she dragged herself back to her quarters. But her exhausted fingers had fumbled and gravity had done the rest. The sound of claws clicking on metal made her look up. Tyr stood in the doorway, his triangular ears perked forward, his silvery fur catching the starlight. The Cravathi cub was barely 3 standard years old, equivalent to a human 6-year-old, and he clutched something in his small, 4-fingered hands with the determination of someone on a sacred mission. A screwdriver. Dr. Mara, Tyr's voice was high and chirping, his translator rendering the complicated harmonics of Cravathi speech into something approximating enthusiasm. "I bring fix tool." Ellen blinked. Then, despite her exhaustion, she felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "Fix tool?" Tyr bounded forward, his tail lashing behind him with excitement. He held up the screwdriver like a trophy, its magnetic tip glinting. "Yes, you spill. I fix, watch." Before Ellen could say anything, the cub dropped to his knees beside the puddle and pressed the screwdriver against the liquid. He moved it in small circles, his face scrunched in concentration, as if the tool might somehow absorb the tea or reverse its spillage through sheer mechanical intervention. It did not. The tea continued spreading. The screwdriver became wet. Ellen watched, fascinated despite herself. In the 6 months since the Cravathi delegation had come aboard the human exploratory vessel, she'd learned that their species approached problems with a peculiar sort of logic. They were talented engineers. Their claws and 4-dimensional spatial reasoning made them naturals at mechanical work, but they were also very, very literal. If a thing was broken, a tool fixed it. That was the Cravathi way. "Tyr," Ellen said gently, "I don't think the screwdriver can fix spilled tea." The cub's ears flattened. His golden eyes, slit-pupiled and bright, turned to her with something that looked like betrayal. "But tools fix things, Papa says. Tools fix everything." "Not everything, buddy." Tyr sat back on his haunches, his tail curling around his feet. He looked at the screwdriver, then at the tea, then at Ellen. His shoulders slumped in a gesture so human-like it made her chest ache. Then, "How fix?" Ellen considered this. She could have told him that some things couldn't be fixed, that spilled tea was just a minor loss, an inconvenience, something you cleaned up and moved on from. But Tyr's expression was so earnest, his belief in solutions so absolute that she didn't want to disappoint him. Instead, she reached into her toolkit and pulled out a cleaning rag. "Different kind of tool," she said, holding it up. "Sometimes fixing isn't about making something work again. Sometimes it's about making things clean, safe. Better than they were." Tyr's ears perked up. "Soft tool?" "Exactly." Ellen knelt beside him and began soaking up the tea. The rag absorbed the liquid quickly, and within moments the deck was merely damp instead of flooded. Tyr watched, his tail beginning to swish again. I help?" he asked. Ellen handed him a second rag from her kit. "Go for it." The cub attacked the remaining moisture with the same intensity he'd brought to the screwdriver solution. His small hands worked quickly, and soon the floor was nearly dry. He sat back panting slightly and looked at her with obvious pride. "Fixed," Ellen agreed. Tyr hesitated, then held out the damp screwdriver. You not angry? That I bring wrong tool?" Ellen took the screwdriver and carefully dried it with a corner of her rag. "Angry? No, you saw a problem and tried to help." "That's not wrong, Tyr, that's kind." The cub tilted his head. "Kind?" "Yeah, kind." Ellen set the screwdriver aside and met his eyes. "Humans believe that trying to help even when you're not sure how is one of the best things you can do." Tyr processed this. His species communicated as much through posture as words, and Ellen could see his confusion warring with something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or hope, Kravathi say, he began slowly. Tools fix machines. Machines keep pack alive. This is important. This is honor. It is, Ellen said. But humans think something else is important too. We think caring about someone enough to try, even with the wrong tool, that's honor too. The cub's tail went still. Then slowly it began to wag. Human way strange, Tyr said. Yeah, we get that a lot. But I like, Ellen smiled. She reached out and gently scratched behind one of Tyr's ears. A gesture she'd learned was acceptable among Kravathi younglings. He leaned into the touch, purring softly, a sound like distant thunder. Tell you what, Ellen said. Next time something spills, you bring me the soft tool first. But if something breaks, really breaks, you bring the screwdriver. Deal? Deal. Tyr's eyes brightened. And I bring you new tea? From dispensary? Ellen's smile widened. That would be amazing. The cub scrambled to his feet and dashed toward the door, his claws clicking rapidly. Then he paused and looked back. Dr. Mara? Yeah, buddy? Thank you. For teaching. For not making laugh at wrong tool. Ellen's chest tightened. Anytime, Tyr. That's what friends do. The cub's ears perked fully forward, the Kravathi equivalent of a grin. And then he was gone. Racing down the corridor with the boundless energy of youth. Ellen sat alone again, staring at the clean deck and the slightly damp screwdriver. Somewhere in the distance she heard Tyr chattering excitedly to one of the adult Kravathi about human fixing wisdom. She picked up her toolkit, stood, and stretched. Her double shift wasn't quite over, but she felt lighter somehow. The galaxy was vast and strange, filled with species that thought in different patterns, valued different truths, but kindness, she thought. Watching the stars wheel past the viewport, kindness was a tool that worked anywhere, even if you brought a screwdriver to spilled tea. Even then,